I have never played a single Ace Combat game in my life.
Okay, I don't know how to fly this. Oh!
As you can probably tell. I had always admired the series from afar, but this was about to change. A couple of weeks ago, I decided to finally jump into this long-running franchise by taking a look at the first 3 mainline games. Before playing these, I knew basically nothing about Ace Combat, apart from a little bit of gameplay I saw from the newer games. So, this was about to be a wild ride. Follow me as I delve into the weird and wacky world of gravity-defying dogfights, political intrigues, and the coolest thing ever, flying into a sunset while rock music is playing in the background. This is my experience with Ace Combat. (1995's Air Combat, which I will just call Ace Combat for any future reference, was an, let's call it, interesting experience. The game opens up with a short introduction to the general setup of the story and the game world. You are an ace pilot, tasked with freeing your country from the grasp of an evil organization, 6 months after a successful coup d'etat. And that's pretty much it. The story of these early games isn't really anything to write home about, so all we need to know right now is that we are supposedly Mr. Top Gun himself. As that short explanation concluded, we immediately get thrown into the main menu screen. In this top-down view of the game's world, we are able to select all of the various missions Ace Combat has to offer, which will hopefully lead us to a swift victory over this evil organization. Here is probably where I should also mention that I didn't end up going for 100% completion in these games. My goal was to mainly finish the story and see how the gameplay would evolve over time, not to beat every single level. But anyways, since we don't really have anything else to do in here, let's just jump into the very first mission. Our first task is a simple one. As a part of an evaluation of our operational abilities, we are supposed to intercept and destroy all enemy resupply units in the area. The mission briefing screen even gives us some details about what specific types of aircraft we will be facing. This, however, means literally nothing to me. Little old me has absolutely no clue what an E-767 or an MiG-31 is. So I guess all I can do is hope that we can make this mission a success. Jumping into the actual gameplay, I am confused to say the least. The UI is fairly simple to understand. We get a compass at the top, a speed indicator on the left, an altitude indicator on the right, a radar in the bottom left, our aircraft's health in the bottom right, as well as things like ammo count. All of this is pretty straightforward, so I'm having no issues here. But what actually confused me was how weirdly my aircraft was moving. Shortly after the mission had started, I was able to figure out how to speed up and slow down, as well as shoot my guns and missiles. But it seemed like I was pretty much locked at a 0-degree angle, basically completely horizontal to the ground. I was able to make some adjustments to go a little up or down, but it didn't really feel like I was in full control of my vehicle. Just to give you some context, the only game that I've played so far which had me do vehicular aerial combat like this was Elite Dangerous. I know that this might be a weird comparison to make, but I thought that Ace Combat was going to control somewhat similar to the flight model found in Elite. Obviously adjusted to fit the controlling scheme of the original PlayStation. And those of you who are seasoned Ace Combat veterans most likely have already figured out what is going on here, but I didn't, as I am a new player to the series. So I continued the mission regardless of how weird it felt to control my aircraft. After a couple of minutes of awkwardly flying around, I was able to shoot down all of the mission's targets. I mostly ended up using the missiles, as they seemed to be the most reliable way to hit my enemies. Before I continue my quest of liberation, I had a quick look at what aircraft were available to me at this early stage in the game. I had noticed that I was able to go with one of 2 different jets already in my possession for the first mission, but I assumed that I would be able to get even more, since the game seemed to throw a lot of money my way pretty quickly. But sadly, none of the other aircraft seemed to be better than my F-14 I went with, so I decided to keep my money for now. The second mission had me intercept some enemy bombers on their way to one of our bases. Although this mission didn't seem to be much more difficult at a first glance, I was quickly proven wrong in my assumption, because this time I was actually being shot at by the other aircrafts escorting the bombers. Crazy, right?
So those right there are some non-targets fighters. Oh! Did I just crash into this thing?
This was indeed a greater threat than the sitting ducks from the previous mission. But I had no real issue here either, so I proceeded to destroy the targets one by one. While I was finishing up this mission, I was wondering how this game would handle me failing to complete the task I was given, or just being destroyed in combat. This was another reason for me wanting to be a bit more careful with my in-game funds, as the last game I did one of these what it's like getting into insert game type videos was about Armored Core, and the first few games in that franchise were unforgiving when it came to losing. So I just wanted to make sure I wouldn't run into any trouble later on. And trust me, there was gonna be some trouble. But for now, we'll just continue on to mission number 3, and it's another very straightforward mission. Go there and intercept the enemy aircraft. This is how most of the game is going to go. When I said that this game's story wasn't anything to write home about earlier, I can also now extend that to the gameplay. If I would have completed all of the missions on my first attempt, my playthrough would have only taken around 1.5 hours. Again, that's not every mission in the game, but that's me beating the game and going to the end credits. So, why did it take me around 3 hours, you may ask? We'll get into that a little bit later, but my point here is that apart from the actual combat scenarios you get put into, there is not much mission objective variety in the game. To me, it felt a little like a proof of concept. Namco wanted to make this type of aerial combat game, so they created this aerial combat simulator, which was just that, an aerial combat simulator between you and multiple AI-piloted craft. They then proceeded to flesh it out a little more, so they were able to sell it to you as an actual product. So, as a result of that, I won't be going into every single mission that I did, because there simply is no reason to talk about all of them at length. I will keep it to the moments and missions which were actually a little more interesting. Even though I just said all of that, mission number 4 actually introduced one of the other mission objective types, which was destroying some enemy communication facilities. On the ground. Additionally, from this moment on, I was able to launch with support from an allied aircraft. This would mean that I'd have to relinquish some of my hard-earned cash up front, but it seemed like a decent trade-off at that time. So, me and William go and take on this mission. And succeed. Truly remarkable.
That wasn't even close at all. I didn't just almost crash into that building whatsoever.
Mission 5 was fairly similar to the last one, except that we were now flying over a pretty vast desert. Here, I had to follow different oil pipelines to eventually find my target buildings, which were usually obscured by the low render distance. I took some time in this mission to try and refine my flying skills, especially when it came to approaching a ground target and hitting them with missiles, or maybe even my actual onboard guns, if my trajectory on approach allowed it.
On target.
That's it. Okay, that took a while, but we got it.
I had now accumulated a fairly sizable bank balance, so it was actually time for me to buy a new toy to fly around with.
Okay, we have 36 million right now. I think we've earned the right to buy a hot new whip. What do you guys think? Ooh, okay, I know this is a bomber, and it's not very costly, so we might as well just grab this. That is a very scary sound.
This brings me to another quirk of the first Ace Combat game. In this first iteration of the formula, you can't really customize your aircraft. Like, at all. They all come with the same machine guns and missiles, which you can swap out for anything else. This definitely makes it easier for me to get used to one specific configuration for the aircraft, but it also feels a little lackluster. Surely that's gonna change in the later games. Right? The only difference between the aircraft currently are things like speed, mobility, and health. This makes them feel somewhat distinct if their stats are vastly different, but also not really. You barely notice a difference at the end of the day. Jumping straight to the next mission, Suppress the Radar Base, I was finally able to answer one of my earliest questions I had. What happens if I die? This mission had me fly through a very narrow canyon, and I'm sure that you can already tell where this is going.
Okay, a higher FOV would help immensely. I'm the master pilot. No one can do anything to me. Look at this form. Oh dear Lord. No! That was such a tight turn. God damn it. What happens on a mission failure? We gotta have at least one, right? I did that on purpose, obviously. I just wanted to see. Do I just have to retry the mission? Let's fly with the... Oh, that's what happens. I lose the plane. I guess that makes sense. After finding out what happens if I crash and burn, I successfully completed this mission without a problem. Next up was another fairly simple assignment of destroy everything that isn't ours, but this time with a pretty backdrop of an idyllic tropical island. During this mission, I actually noticed something else, which didn't really have anything to do with the actual gameplay itself. Man, games from this like PS1 era had some great funky soundtrack. Some rock here, yeah, I love that. Now games just have the boring old, oh, you know, we got an orchestra to play all the music, ooh. I'm a sucker for great music in games, and even though this isn't actually my favorite soundtrack out of the 3 games that I've played, it was pretty good, and I ended up enjoying most of the tracks. Recently, I found out that I had become more and more jaded by the exceedingly orchestral nature of most of the soundtracks from games that I play, so this felt pretty refreshing, and I was just vibing and having a great time. But anyways, I beat the mission obviously, as I am Mr. Top Gun himself. Just kidding, I died on my very first attempt. But on the second one, I finished it with ease and style. Next up was mission number 15, which I accidentally selected. But it was fine because this would put me on a direct path towards the final mission of the game. And let me tell you that one is gonna be fun. But for now, I had to take down one of the most dangerous targets we have come up against so far, a red suspension bridge. That one is very dangerous. Whoa! What's hitting me? Ooh. So I made my way there and expertly maneuvered around the opposing aircraft fleet while shooting the vital load-bearing points of the bridge. Where that? Where that? There we go. You don't see me. You can't hit me. Yes! Bingo! At the start of this video, I mentioned that I didn't really feel like I was fully in control of my aircraft, and I was finally about to learn why that was. Just before the previous mission, someone in chat told me that I should switch to the so-called expert controlling scheme. People are suggesting to switch controls. I mean, this feels fine. I don't even know how, like, where I switch controls. When I first booted up this game, I had a quick look at the options menu, which is only accessible from the starting screen, but I must have skipped over the part where that was an option. People in chat were urging me to go and change it, even though we were already pretty far in the game, so I finally gave in and tried it out. Okay, I don't know how to fly this. Oh, oh god. Oh, please. Hold on. I understand what you mean now that you can do a lot more, but I'm not used to this now, and I'm already in the game, and okay. Okay. With this issue finally resolved, I could go back to completing the game. Like, literally. The next mission was the final one. And oh boy, this was a tough one. I was to eliminate a giant airborne fortress, armed to the brim with deadly missiles. This was our enemy's final attempt to turn the tide of the war in their favor yet again, but I was there to stop them. Or so I thought. This mission took me, no joke, around 1.5 hours to beat. I spent about the same amount of time with this mission as I had with the rest of the game so far. I will spare you from having to sit through all of this, but let me just say that it wasn't pretty. The fact that I had just changed my controlling scheme was probably partly to blame, as I still had to adjust to it, but this was by far the most difficult mission in the game regardless. Alright, so the way to beat this mission is to just give everyone a headache.
Congratulations. The enemy has capitulated and the coup has failed. The rightful...
It was finally done. After many failed attempts, I pulled through with some expert maneuvering to take down the giant fortress. As me and my comrades flew into the sunset, I reflected on my playthrough and came to a conclusion on my opinion of this game. This is a nice demo, is what I thought. It didn't really feel like what I played here was the full experience of what Ace Combat is, but I was eager to learn more over the following days. As I wrapped up my stream, I could finally get some rest until I would set my sights on the next game in the series, Ace Combat 2. Hell yeah. Now, finally, we can enjoy ourselves some good old-fashioned dogfights in the air. Released in 1997, only 2 years after the first game, it would still be well within the original PlayStation console's lifecycle. As such, I wasn't really expecting to see any major increase in the general scope of the gameplay or even just graphical improvements. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that there were a few substantial changes made. And before we get into those, let's see another great introductory lore dump.
A coup d'etat broke out in the military corps' general area code NAP 2700. To respond to the rebel forces, the military corps' headquarters made a decision to use the Special Tactical Fighter Squadron Scarface, which consists of you, my fellow pilots.
Right, so the story setup in Ace Combat 2 is pretty much identical to the first game, with a few minor details changed. The main menu and mission select screen is still functionally the same, just with some added flair and conveniences, which I did end up really appreciating. But what I was the most interested in was how they would expand on aircraft customization as well as mission variety, since I felt that this was lacking in the previous game. So, after all that training I did fighting this goddamn flying fortress, I immediately jumped into the action without much hesitation. The first couple of missions were, yet again, very much in line with everything we've done previously. Enemy aircraft here, go shoot it down, please, thank you. What made Ace Combat 2 stand out immediately though, was how much nicer it looked and felt to play. From the vastly upgraded mission briefings and cleaned up UI to the actual environments I was flying through, this game was a clear step above its predecessor. There's even a neat little mission summary animation after every successful operation, where you get to see the exact path you took and where you shot down all of the enemy aircraft. But what surprised me the most was how much nicer it felt to control my aircraft. This honestly might have just been because I finally started to learn how to properly fly after having internalized all the lessons I learned in the previous game, or maybe even because I was actually starting to play in third person in certain scenarios, but nonetheless, I was having a great time zooming around the skies and taking down some bad guys. The first set of missions aren't really all that important to talk about individually, as they are, like I've said, very straightforward in both gameplay and story. I did, however, find out pretty quickly what happens when you fail a mission in this game. To the turns! Alright, this is a lot more difficult already. You lose a little bit of money. Not a lot, but it's obviously best to avoid failing as much as possible. Another thing to note is that while these missions were simple, they somehow felt more substantial than most in the first game. It would take me a while to figure out why that was, but even at this early stage, I had noticed a difference in that aspect. The first truly interesting moment of my playthrough happened after I completed mission number 5. I was presented with a choice. Either I could go for a nighttime pursuit plane or attack on the mine. Now, the reason for this being interesting is not just because the game had been linear up to that point, but also what this choice implied for the rest of the playthrough. This felt more like an important choice, like I had seen in my What It's Like Getting Into Armored Core series. Usually, this meant that I would be locked out of going for the other mission I didn't pick until a second playthrough, and I was indeed correct in my assumption. After completing my mission of choice, I had no way of going back to the other one. And while we're already in the topic of the story, I might as well let the cat out of the bag at this point. The choices you make in this game actually affect the playthrough in a fairly meaningful way. The entire first half of the game is essentially one single path, during which you can make certain choices that will change what happens in the second half. You basically get to choose between two different story routes, the first one being called Operation Alphaville, and the second one being Operation Bellissima, each coming with a handful of missions exclusive to that particular path. Google also tells me that there are a bunch of hidden missions which lead into some alternate endings for the game, but I didn't get to see any of those since I just did one pretty straightforward playthrough. I thought I should mention this here because I can already see people typing up a storm because I didn't do my due diligence of playing this game 4 times like I should, as it is their favorite game in the series. This is probably gonna get even worse when I start talking about the 3rd game, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Going back to my actual playthrough, as I made my decision to go for the nighttime pursuit plane, I noticed that I had really been vibing with the music again, even more so than in the first game. The selection and range of soundtrack in Ace Combat 2 really resonated with me. I can already tell you that this is my favorite OST so far, and I'd really like to go into details as to why that is, but I'm pretty sure that most people won't care, and this video is already going to be long enough, so, you know, I'll just leave it at that. The next mission I found really interesting was High Altitude Chase, and you do exactly that. Chase after an enemy bomber unit at very high altitude. Yes, the mission names have been very descriptive so far. What made this one interesting to me was the actual gameplay tied to high altitude flight. Breaking through the clouds was a great visual, and having to properly manage your speed and flight angle to not stall and fall back down below the cloud layer was pretty cool and an interesting concept. The enemy aircraft was moving really fast, however, so I really had to try and keep up. But after chasing the bomber for a couple of minutes and not really being able to catch up, this happened. Okay, that was interesting. So now I know what to do, but that doesn't make it any easier. Wait, I still got money for it. Oh, did I just fail the mission and it kept going? Was that meant to happen? Maybe. Be sure to tell me in the comments what happened here if you know. The next set of missions after this are pretty standard again, and there's not much to talk about. I take over an enemy arms production facility, destroy dangerous prototype bomber hangars on quite the pretty island map, and finally destroy a mobile ship fleet stationed somewhere nearby. However, on this last mission, there was a little something, other than just the banging soundtrack and visuals.
But this music is keeping me alive. How the controls are better. It feels a bit more smooth than the previous game. But again, this could also just be because I'm getting better at the game now. Yeah, but I'm starting to get the evasive maneuvers down and all that, so maybe this is just because I'm getting better. But it feels better than the first game. Like how well they... Oh. What? Wait, what just happened? Wait, do I have to land? Wait, what was happening? I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready. This was the first time I was asked to do a landing in this game, so it really caught me off guard. As a result of that, I got to greet the fishes. But the mission was a success nonetheless, so I kept moving forward to another ravine mission. Another little issue that I had with the first 2 games, which I haven't mentioned so far, is target visibility. I was waiting for a good mission to show as an example for this, and the next one, taking over the hydraulic power plant, is perfect for this. So, what do I mean when I talk about target visibility? Very simple. Usually, if you have a ground target, there will be weaponry around your object of interest to defend it. These weapons, or sometimes just other targetable parts, get in the way of selecting what's actually important. And not only that, but if things are really close together, you might not even know which one of the funny little squares is actually your target. Especially if you're flying past at higher speeds or need to dodge incoming missiles, which happens a lot. I kinda suspect that this might be intentional design, in which case I just don't really like it. I found myself being annoyed at not knowing what I actually need to shoot at, but other people might have a different opinion on this.
I don't want to outright call this bad game design. I just don't know enough about aerial combat games like this, so I will just leave it at I don't like it. Anyways, I ended up beating this mission after some attempts, and because of what I just explained, I left with some mixed feelings about that one. While this issue would persist throughout most of the game, after making my next mission choice, I would finally understand why I was having so much more fun playing AC2 than the first one. If we quickly go back to something I said at the start of the Ace Combat 2 segment, another thing to note is that while these missions were simple, they somehow felt more substantial than most in the first game. During my first mission of Operation Alphaville, which is the route I ended up going with, I had to, yet again, take out certain enemy-owned silos in the middle of a mountainous desert-like map. Very simple setup, same type of mission I had been doing in the past couple of hours, but this time around, it finally clicked. The reason why I preferred Ace Combat 2's missions over the first game came down to level design. Even though the objectives are essentially the same, AC2 uses its play space in more interesting ways. More detail in the environments enables them to have greater visual appeal, while also creating new hazards, enemy placements, and compound layouts to keep everything fresh and more engaging. The player is required to do maneuvers of a higher complexity than before due to the terrain and enemy placements, which was perfectly displayed in this and many other missions towards the end of the game. I am honestly surprised by how long it took me to realize this, but better late than never, I suppose. All of the missions I would do from this point onwards were really enjoyable. Some more than others, of course, but it felt like I finally started to actually understand why people really like this game series. Ace Combat 1 made almost no impact on me, so I was really hoping for the second game to grab my attention, which it most definitely achieved. And if it didn't happen at that silo mission, it most definitely happened during what is probably my favorite mission in the game. Destroy the coastal radar facility. Just take a look at it.
See, look at the precision, the performance. Where am I hitting it from here? No, I didn't get it. Oh. Do not. Oh, I can't do the approach. Because there's always missiles everywhere. Mr. Ace Combat. Mr. Ace Combat himself. And now we finally arrive at what I mistakenly thought was going to be the last mission of the game. Attack the enemy-controlled city. Based on the mission briefing, I was sure that this operation would officially end the coup d'etat, and we would emerge victorious once more. But as it turns out, I was wrong. The game actually had one final mission in store for me. Who is on the top of the world? Mission accomplished, baby.
Aorus, this is Scarface 1. On final approach. I need Scarface 1, clear the range.
Oh, that's a lot bigger. We did it. We actually touched down on the... And that was it. We had done it. This concluded my Ace Combat 2 playthrough. No, I'm just joking. That would have been a fitting end, but there actually was one final mission after this. Attack the enemy headquarters is a tough one, as it probably should be. This was the last stronghold of the enemy forces, and as such, it was heavily fortified with ground-based weaponry as well as various aircraft ready to hunt me down. This mission took me a while to beat, not nearly as bad as the final one from the first game, but it was still a pretty decent challenge. I will just let my final mission attempt speak for itself here. I mean, this is kind of the idea. I just have to basically go like all the way in one direction, then come all the way back to try to catch him off guard. Who am I GGing? Myself. I already took way too much damage. Basically, one more hit is gonna send me straight to hell. Yeah, well, I destroyed all of these. Let's try to go back to the first things. Wait, is there only 3 more? Wait, what? No, there's more planes. Where? I didn't kill that many planes. Where have they all gone? Okay, somehow got him. I only see 2 more planes right now here. And there was so many more before. Did they like crash? Did the AI just decide to just be poopy all of a sudden? That's one. Okay, there's only one more on the map. Did I just luck out like crazy? My closing thoughts on Ace Combat 2 are pretty simple. It was a much more enjoyable experience than the first game. Almost every aspect of AC2 just felt more fleshed out. But at the same time, it was just that. A more fleshed out version of air combat. It didn't address my main issues with the first game, like having aircraft customization or a more interesting story. Oh yeah, did you even notice that I didn't mention the aircraft you pilot in this game whatsoever? That's because they were pretty much identical to the first game, so there wasn't really anything to talk about. While there were only a couple of new and interesting mission types, the actual layout of levels and combat encounters were vastly improved, so I was able to enjoy that aspect of the game a lot more. But it still didn't really feel like they were using all the potential that the series had. However, everything would change as soon as I started a new playthrough of the next game on my list. Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere, the third and final game of this video, is a special one. The first Ace Combat was a test run, showing what the core of the series is all about, while Ace Combat 2 refined the systems and made an effort to be a more enjoyable experience all around. And the third game is like, screw this, I'm just gonna go crazy. Released in 1999, this was still a PlayStation 1 game, but it blows the previous entries in the series completely out of the water in terms of visuals and amount of content. And just so I can make this clear right at the start, this is also my favorite out of the three games by far. But I think that I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Why is it so good, and why am I not talking about it the same way as I have with the previous games? Stay tuned to find out. I know that we're already like 30 minutes into the video, so why am I even saying it at this point? Subscribe if you've been enjoying it so far. As I was finishing up my AC2 playthrough, people in the stream chat kept telling me that if I was going to play AC3, I had to get the Japanese version of the game with an English patch. This confused me at first, but I obliged and went with it over the native English version. So, when it was time to stream the game, I booted it up and...
未明、ゼネラルグループの飛行部隊が緊張の続くメリトン地域上空で軍事演習。
Let's see if it's different from the previous games. Ace Combat 3 actually has a proper story. I cannot believe it. The Mad Lads have finally done it. Just to be clear, I'm someone who values gameplay over anything else. But really, having neither a proper story or compelling lore does end up feeling a little lackluster. Seeing actual characters pop up on my screen, delivering some of the first interesting exposition in the series, I was overcome with joy. The general setup of the story isn't all that different from the previous games again, but AC3 is much more elaborate in its setting and presentation. Countries, corporations, people and their hopes and dreams. This was the first time I actually felt like I was getting sucked into the Ace Combat universe, and I was absolutely loving it. This game is special in many ways, so when it came to deciding on how I wanted to approach writing the Ace Combat 3 segment of the video, I had a choice to make. Do I try to talk about it the same way as I did with the previous games, or do I treat it like it's something completely different? I chose the latter. To explain why that is, I need to show you this diagram. What you are seeing on screen right now is a chart of all of the different missions in Ace Combat 3, or more specifically, the different paths you can take to achieve various different endings. This game came on 2 discs. There was just that much more content than in the previous games. As such, I was not able to do multiple playthroughs to experience all of it, since Elden Ring's DLC was right around the corner and that took priority. Insert angry comments here. I know it's gonna happen. I don't want to go through the missions one by one again, because the gameplay hasn't evolved drastically and I've already gone over most of my thoughts in regards to that. I don't want to attempt to break down the whole story of Ace Combat 3, although I think that it would be fun to try and piece together all of the different paths you can take in this game, but I decided that it would be best if we possibly leave that for another time. This video is already long enough, and this would take me ages to put together, so what I will do instead is tell you why I think that this game was the point at which I finally started to fall in love with Ace Combat. Going into this game, I didn't have a lot of expectations.
but I was very quickly overwhelmed by the strange charm of AC3's world and characters. After learning a bit about the history of the continent that this game's happenings will take place on, I could already see a lot of resemblance to the other franchise that I keep mentioning in this video. The government of the Eusean continent has been slowly but surely dismantled and replaced by powerful corporations which proceed to fight for territory, resources, and power. We, of course, become a part of this all-out corporate war and will eventually have to take sides with one of the factions found in the game to attain victory over all the others. This surely does sound familiar, right? But what elevated the story of Ace Combat 3 over most I've seen in the early Armored Core games were the characters I met along the way, and how much of a personal bond I would end up creating with them. I think this was, in no small part, thanks to the fact that I would actually see and talk to them directly, instead of just reading emails back in the nest. Coupled with the fact that this game has 5 different story paths to take, each with different missions and endings, this really felt like a world that was alive, and I wanted to know where fate would lead me. Just in case you're curious right now, I ended up going down the route of ending D, which was, let's call it an impactful one. And one more thing that I should probably address now is that, as it turns out, the English version of the game, which I mentioned earlier, almost completely removes this story, so it ends up feeling a lot more like the previous entries in the series. Why? Why would you remove the one thing that makes this one stand out among the rest? But they didn't only remove the interactions you have with characters, they also drastically cut down on the number of missions in the game. According to the wiki, the English release has only 36 compared to the 52 missions in the Japanese version. Apparently, the reason for the stripping down of the Western release of AC3 was made because they didn't think that people in the West would like to have a story. They really done robbed the game of what made it special. That's why I had to get the Japanese version, and why you should also do the same if you haven't played it already. But anyways, moving on, as I started my playthrough, I wasn't aware of this journey I was about to embark on. So I hopped into the very first mission, just to discover that the gameplay feel had also changed quite a bit. Okay, the controls feel really delayed on this one. All of a sudden, my aircraft felt like it had a lot more weight to it than before. What I believe has happened here is that they decided to make the flight model a little bit more realistic, maybe? It did throw me off a little at the start, but I quickly adjusted to the change and ended up enjoying it quite a bit. But even before I went on the mission, there was another huge change which I did not see coming. We finally got aircraft customization, baby. Well, kind of. What you're seeing right now is all there is to it. You get the option to choose between 2 different weapons. I mean, it's at least something. Not nearly as much as I'd like, but we are going in the right direction. As I was making my way through the missions, I also started to notice that there wasn't actually any aircraft for me to buy. No hangar, no shop, nothing. It turns out that this game just gives you new vehicles to fly with for the missions. Honestly, I don't know how to feel about it, so I won't mention it again. And that concludes the main differences in the gameplay for this game, but that doesn't mean that we're done just yet, because the missions also ended up receiving some major upgrades. First and foremost, the average length seems to have increased. This was achieved through multiple ways, but mainly through changing mission objectives while you are on the field. Usually you had one task, and once you would carry it out, the mission concluded. That's how it went for the first 2 games, but in AC3, a mission can and will change depending on the things that you do. And all of that will then also play into the complicated mission route structure, leading you into a completely new path, or giving you extra stuff to do. One of the first big choices I made was refusing to join a character called Dijin in deserting from our current employer pretty early on in the game. As you can see in the mission path chart, if I had decided to join him instead, my playthrough would have ended up being completely different. There are various points in the story where you have to make a decision like this, but there are also these extra conditions linked to certain mission outcomes, which will quickly branch off of the main path for a hidden alternative mission. There's just so much more to discover here than in the previous games. It is insane. Additionally, the environment started to get pretty creative too. From flying through a claustrophobic ship interior to actually going to goddamn space. There were so many memorable set pieces, even just on the one path that I ended up going for. During the mission where I went to space, I would also be able to pilot one of these weird sci-fi looking aircraft, which somehow fit perfectly into the setting of the game, in spite of its outlandish appearance. But there's still one more mission type which I haven't talked about, that was so unexpected I could have never even dreamed of seeing it in this game. Of course, I'm talking about chasing after a mentally unstable girl through another ravine. And last but definitely not least, I also need to mention the soundtrack, since I've done so for all of the other games so far. I don't like it that much. This was probably one of the weaker parts of Ace Combat 3. It's not bad by any means, but the OST can't even come close to the heights of the previous game. The general sound and feel of most of the tracks in AC3 is more industrial and electronic, which isn't a bad thing, but I just found myself wishing that it would have carried over some of the qualities from Ace Combat 2. And these are my general thoughts about the third installment of the Ace Combat franchise. Since I feel like there's still much more to discover in this game, I am going to hold off on speaking on it any further. But I think that I was able to make it clear why this has been my favorite entry in the series so far. In conclusion, I have become a fan of Ace Combat, or more specifically, of its third iteration. If the series keeps going in the direction of AC3, then I will be more than happy to continue my journey. Playing these 3 games and seeing how the series has evolved in its early years should give me a greater appreciation for any of the games going forward. And yes, I plan to go through the newer ones live on this channel as well, so subscribe and stay tuned. I should start my playthrough of Ace Combat 4 sometime soon after this video goes live. And if the rumors that I've heard are true, I think that I'm going to enjoy this one quite a bit. But this was my journey of getting into the Ace Combat franchise. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. And again, fighter jets flying into the sunset. Why did I decide to make this into like a 43-minute video on the 3 games at the same time? I could have easily turned this into 3 separate videos to push out more consistent content like I've promised on my community Discord server. Link in description. But I hope that you enjoyed watching this regardless. The next video will be a lot shorter but also pretty spicy, so be ready for that one. And as always, the hugest of shoutouts to my lovely channel members as seen here on screen. I can't thank you all enough. That's going to be it from me. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next shorter video. Goodbye. Ladies, calm down.